Welcome back, folks. The board had a discussion, the evaluation of our commissioner. We were unanimous in our appreciation for her work, positive evaluation. We will send a letter across. We're still working on the wording of that, but I assure you that it's very, very positive. What we did not have time to get to was to talk about some of the goals that you have suggested for yourself, and so we hope to maybe go in exec session again later this afternoon just to talk about that. And obviously, we'd like you to join us that time.
Great.
Sorry if we took a long time to talk about this and made it feel like a hot seat.
Yeah.
We weren't really thinking about that until at the end, thinking, oops.
I was planning my vacation.
You were working on that resume, right? That I was teasing you about. No, we're very, very pleased with you.
Thank you.
All of us are. So
Unanimous.
So, like yesterday, I've totally screwed up the schedule. So we're going to skip item 4.0 and go to 5.01, Rules for the Administration of Early Literacy Grant Program. State Board voted to approve this notice of rulemaking at its August 15, 2018 board meeting. A hearing to promulgate these rules was made known through publication of a public notice on September 10, 2018 through the Colorado Register and by State Board notice on October 3, 2018. State Board is authorized to promulgate these rules pursuant to 22-2-1071C CRS. Commissioner, is staff prepared to provide an overview?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. They are. I'll turn it over to Dr. Colsman and Dr. Cobb.
No puppies.
No puppies.
No puppies.
No puppies. But the other picture was Board Member Durham's granddaughter.
Oh,
that was up
sweet.
earlier.
She's cute.
If you guys want to get started, I'll pull up the PowerPoint
Okay.
for you.
Thank you, Commissioner Anthis. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, we are here to talk to you this morning to conduct a rulemaking hearing for the Early Literacy Grant Program under the Colorado READ Act. Just a little background information. This program is specific to providing grants for school districts, both as in charter schools, district charter schools, and institute charter schools, really to focus on the essential components of reading instruction. And this is a grant that actually began in 2013, 2014. There we go. Got the PowerPoint up and ready to go. Currently, there are 3 cohorts with 31 districts and 62 schools. In this past legislative session, Senate Bill 18-1393 changed the award and structure of the grant program. And so these are the 4 big components in terms of the changes to the grant program, specifically simplifying an application for small rural districts, allowing for 10% funds to be used for sustainability planning, and 15% of funds for professional development initiatives. And the remaining funds are awarded to the current grant program. And so rulemaking was noticed in August of 2018.
Louder, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Rulemaking was noticed in August of 2018, and we engaged stakeholders and gathered feedback, and we're now at a point where the October rulemaking hearing is scheduled. We did not receive any feedback for these particular rules.
Thank you. Is there anyone here to testify? Nope. So before we have further discussion, may I have a motion, please? I move to approve. Come on, guys. It's a short one.
I move to approve the rules for the administration of the Early Literacy Grant Program 1 CCR 301-90.
Thank you. It's a proper motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion. Board Member Rankin.
How much money did we allocate for that? Is that the 33 million?
No, this is the $5 million for this grant program. An additional million was added in this last legislative session, so prior to this, it was a $4 million annual program.
So is it for the next 3 years? Is that,
So that's an annual allocation of $4 million. As of this year, this fiscal year, be an annual allocation of $5 million. And our current cohort 3, I believe, goes through 2020. So we will be issuing a grant application for this year for the additional funds that have been approved.
oh, thank you.
Board Member Schaffel.
Can you just sketch out how this relates to the READ Act? And also how it compares in terms of outcomes? Just differences, compare, contrast.
Sure. So the early literacy grant really looks comprehensively at a literacy program within a school, whereas the READ Act funds are allocated specifically for interventions for students identified with a significant reading deficiency. Within the early literacy grant program, grantees may use their funds to fund universal instruction as well as targeted and intensive levels of instruction. They also can use their funds for professional development as well as for coaching. Because of that more comprehensive approach, we do see more positive outcomes from the early literacy grant program. Right now, what we're doing is a pretty comprehensive analysis of our data for the READ Act. Now that we have about 5 years worth of data, we can look longitudinally. And so part of that analysis is doing a comparison of the state with respect to our early literacy grant schools. Kind of early indications show that the early literacy grant schools do see better outcomes than the rest of the state. However, we really want to dig a little bit deeper into that. I will also say that part of the analysis that we're doing will include through our Exceptional Student Services Unit. We have a structured literacy program that supports our state improvement plan for students with disabilities. And they have a specific focus on early literacy. We see similar results with that effort as well, because that is also looking at a comprehensive program for schools. So we are hopefully going to have some data to share in the next month or two with respect to that. I do think all of this kind of fits in that bigger context too, around what do we know about how we're serving students across the board who are struggling with reading, but then also what about our students with dyslexia. So what we're working to do is provide a really comprehensive look at all of what we know from our data.
Thank you, and that is kind of where all my scribbles relate to, which is I'm trying to get a sense for when we get to the third grade measure, how many of those, how many kids are still on the READ, how many third graders are still on the READ Act description? They are still being provided services as compared to the kids whose needs were addressed but they are off. Are they proficient by third grade? It seems to me there might be a disconnect between the kids who have a reading disability and kids actually getting to reading proficiency in the early years.
And that's part of the analysis that we're looking at. We're looking at what happens with students who are identified with a reading deficiency, and we're looking more at, rather than what is a static rate of SRD in the state, more to are kids coming out of that designation, and then what happens to them?
Are they
moving
proficient,
to
or are
proficiency?
they still not proficient,
Right.
but not as far behind?
Correct.
And some
Right.
of that in the weeds detail would be helpful, just to know at what level of deficiency are you actually identified?
Right.
Is it that you're not proficient, or is it somewhere below that?
Right.
Yeah, and actually,
Just a minute.
the bar for a significant reading deficiency is a bar that would say anybody in that category is severely at risk for being able to read at third grade.
Right.
So it really is it is a level of concern, a high level of
Right.
concern. There is a higher bar. This is my fancy 2-level
Right.
descriptor.
What's going on in that area?
Exactly.
Correct.
This is an area we're really interested in.
Good.
You
Me
know,
too.
we're finding that some students are exiting from the SRD category,
Mhm.
but then we're finding that they're being replaced by new kids. So as kids are being moved out, you know, our working assumption is, or working hypothesis is, there are students in this middle range who may or may not be getting the support they need, such that as the years go on, they fall into that range. So
Right.
that's some of the analysis we're looking into to see what's really happening.
But on the other hand, as the years go on, there are more kids who are proficient at reading, right? I mean, the numbers do go up from third grade
Yeah.
to like fifth or sixth grade.
Well, one of the things that we
Right.
found, if we look at CMAS data for the last, I think it's 3 or 4 years, if we look at the lowest performance category of did not meet expectations, we've actually seen a drop in
wow.
students in that category by
Oh,
about
okay.
2%.
Okay.
And we're also, if we look at the higher categories, levels 4 and 5, that meets or exceeds expectations, we're also seeing an increase there.
Okay.
So I think that there's some positive news here. What's the question is what's happening in between, and how can we help ensure that kids are moving,
Right.
you know, out of that lowest category, but continue to move.
Right. And even if it's positive in later grades, which is when it's an additional struggle for the kids
Mhm.
because
Right.
they need to be learning to read
Mhm.
and they're still learning how to read rather than to read for content.
The other thing I would add is when we talk about reading proficiency or competency in the state, we have to recognize that our bar for that on our CMAS is a high bar.
Yeah.
We've raised that bar. So actually, if we look back at, you know, back to CSAP days and we said who was proficient or advanced, it was somewhere around 30%, such that, or I'm sorry, 70%, which didn't match with what NAEP was telling us at 4th grade. NAEP was saying it was somewhere
Wow.
around in the 30 to 40% range. Now we're actually more close to what NAEP says with our CMAS data.
Okay.
So I think that there's kind of, you know, we've had a reality check at that same time about what do we think, how high is high enough for that proficiency. So there is a lot at play here, and I think there's a lot for us to dig into and a lot for us to learn so that we can really set the right supports and right policies in place.
Okay. Then I have one more question about this, in terms of this grant, this sustainability grant after 3 years. Do we have a measure for how much progress needs to have been made in order for us to feel comfortable with adding some more resources at that particular school? Is there a cutoff? Should that not be in the rules but be something that staff is looking at? I just
Mhm.
sort of, the sustainability part
Right.
made a lot of sense to me, but it wasn't really clear to me how you all decide whether to
Yeah,
give
I-
it or not.
So within the grant program, grantees annually have to meet certain performance targets in order for us to continue funding them. So we do look at growth of students over time as part of that measure. I think they're about, if I'm recalling, I think we have 5 different measures that they need to meet in order to have continued funding. So there are school district or schools that may not be funded the subsequent year. We would see this falling to that same category around, you know, if you've continued to see growth, and you could then qualify for a sustainability grant if we see that you're making that progress.
I think she was first before me.
I don't know which one of us was, but this
Okay.
relates directly to something
Sure.
that Dr. Postman was sharing, so if I,
Sure.
thank you so much, Dr. Flores.
I saw your hand first.
When you touched upon the concept of seeing kids coming out of the lowest category but being replaced by other kids at a later age, I can't help but be reminded of the talk that we had by parents of dyslexic students, or parents of students with dyslexia. Is it possible that what we're seeing there is that dynamic that one stakeholder touched on, and that was kids doing a really good job of covering their disability until that became impossible to do? Is it possible that some of those are dyslexic kids who can no longer cover for their disability? Possibly?
No, I think it's possible. I think what we have found in the sort of preliminary analysis is that obviously when the assessment starts to ratchet up by grades, the reading skills obviously get a little bit more complex. And so obviously in terms of the questions that are being asked and specifically in terms of the type of skills that a student would need to be able to demonstrate, I think that's a reasonable hypothesis. We still have to be able to look into the data a little bit more carefully to be able to find out if in fact that's the case. But I think what we're trying to do is ask as many questions as possible to really begin to sort of tease out, because preliminarily we are seeing differences in rates depending upon grades. And so we want to start to really begin to look into that a lot more deeply to understand, what might be contributing to that.
Okay, thank you.
And in addition to the difference in rates of identification at different grade levels, so for instance, between K and 1, we see a jump because the types of skills that you would measure, foundational reading skills at kindergarten, are pretty, they're pretty minimal. And there's a big jump in the skills that you're looking at for first grade, so we see a difference there. But we also see a difference in the identification of students with disabilities, of how many of those. So when we look at how many of the students identified with a significant reading deficiency also have an individual education plan, we see some trends there. So we're trying to understand how are those interplaying with one another.
Okay. The other question that leapt to mind was when I noticed on page 4, the board may award up to 15% of funds to fund professional development initiatives for LEPs. In the event, I know none of us has a crystal ball, but we know that conversations are happening across the street with leadership regarding dyslexia, and specifically regarding better training educators to recognize the signs. Do we think this is the logical place in the event that becomes a legislative reality? Do we think this is the logical place for that support to come from, or is there a variety of places that might come from?
Sure, I certainly think that this could be one of a number of places where that type of training could be provided. Obviously, that'll be up to others to make that decision, but certainly that could be a place where that could be incorporated, as well. But obviously, if a parent of a student with dyslexia happens to have a child who attends a school that is not a part of the ELG grant, there may be additional questions that get raised as well.
Member Flores?
I know we're having a contagion of dyslexia, but I hope we don't conflate dyslexia with second language learners, and that second language learners, they do have a continuum of learning a second language and reading. So have we done enough, and are we doing enough and thinking enough within the monies that are being allocated to serve those kids that who may need tutoring, a little more tutoring and such or maybe other things?
Yeah, Dr. Flores, in addition to our analysis, one of the things that we are trying to find out exactly is in the students obviously who may have IEPs, but also students who are also second language learners. And so what we're trying to do is tease out that data a little bit more specifically to find out exactly who students are who may be on read plans, and really being able to provide more precise guidance so that a student may not be identified as having a significant reading deficiency when in fact their issue is they still have yet to learn English, and so as a result of that have not been able to perform as well on the assessment. Right. So part of the analysis that we're doing is really starting to ask those questions and get a more complete picture of who students are with significant reading deficiencies, and so that way we can be more precise in terms of the guidance that we provide to the field.
And let's not forget that there are kids, and a large number of kids, really basically, that can read and may not speak, So there are a large number of people that learn English through reading. And don't expect for every kid to be speaking and reading, because if we wait for that, it'll be much, much longer. So you read to learn English. I wish we could remember that motto, because there's a large number of kids that do that.
Board Member Sheffel.
I just had a couple other questions. On it, I think it's 63.01B, it says aligning with the READ Act. Did you say that this grant is actually a little more successful than the READ Act? And then you had mentioned the importance of embedded coaching, which is more highly effective than professional development, more of a sit and get model. Would it make sense, instead of saying aligning with the READ Act, if this is more effective, then to kind of spell out some of those differences and ask grantees to implement the most effective?
So that thing is an excellent question, and what the language here is meant to do is, currently grantees need to look on the advisory list of instructional programs. These are programs that have been vetted to show that they are scientifically or evidence-based programs. So they need to be using one of those programs that's on the CDE advisory list. So that's what that's pertaining to. So we, that language is meant to say these grantees really need to select a program that's been pre-vetted.
Right, okay.
So I don't know if that helps with what you're seeing there.
Maybe do you want to specify then aligned with the READ Act recommendations for intervention materials or something? Or it's just that if the model is more effective here because of the embedded coaching approach, then it would be great if maybe that were spelled out so people will do that. 'Cause
Are you
Yeah.
recommending a change, Dr.
is
Schiffel?
it possible, or is this
Sure.
somewhere in a guidance document where you're spelling it out more?
So there's two approaches that we could actually change the language of this and have that be an amendment. Or we could, it is part of the application, the grant application right now, and part of the guidance for the grant program.
That's
but
fine, yeah. I
Okay,
just
so
want-
if you would feel more comfortable making sure that it's really explicit in rule, we
I
can
don't
do
think
so.
it needs to be as long as it's in the guidance
Okay.
documents.
Okay.
And then one other question on the assessment. Did you spell out how this gets assessed? Students who have significant reading deficiencies, how is it assessed?
So the grantees are asked to use the same assessment tool so that we can look across the grant programs and provide more support.
Consistency.
So, and I believe that is Dibbles Next that they're required to use so that it's a common assessment and we can train them in how to use that data.
Okay, great. And then for the professional, this is my last question.
Go ahead, go right ahead.
Does it make sense on the professional development to say something about embedded coaching, or what do you think? Or is that also in the guidance document?
That is part of the grant program, is that they have coaching as part of it. And we do, as part of the advisory list on the CDE website, is we have vetted professional development providers who go through an application process to ensure that they understand scientifically based reading instruction.
Okay, great, thank you, appreciate it.
Okay. I think that's part of the reason why we see the good results here.
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Any other questions? Board Member Rankin?
I have a similar question to
Yeah.
that. Maybe Dr. Cobb knows the answer. I was looking at the definition of significant reading deficiency, and I'd like to know the difference between that and a reading disability, and where dyslexia fits in on those, and how this money is distributed between those two definitions,
Right.
or if we have a
Right. So
top line.
the disability is actually a federal designation. Is probably the best way that I could talk about the distinction in terms of significant reading deficiency. That definition has been established through one's performance on any number of the assessments that have been established through the READ Act. So anytime a student scores at or below that particular point, they could be identified as having a significant reading deficiency. Now, those two categories are not exclusive. So a student could have a disability and a significant reading deficiency, or they could be distinguishable from one another, where a student could have a disability and not have a significant reading deficiency. And so where this moves into Dr. Foster's territory probably more precisely than mine, where there are a number of categories in which a student could have a disability that may or may not impact their ability to read.
It's, is the state definition, it seems rather broad on significant reading deficiency. I mean, I can see where those two might overlap, but I can see a student having an IEP, but he might just have a deficiency deficiency, and then I wonder how this all fits into dyslexia and where that fits in. We're getting a lot of gray areas here.
So the definition for significant reading deficiency really is set out in the READ Act, and I think the intention was to say that really define it by those minimum skill competencies, which our assessments measure those foundational reading skills. And it's meant to say, you know, any student who is not meeting those minimal competencies is significantly below grade level and needs intervention. I think the intention was to say, let's identify those students and provide them support as early as possible and not wait for whether or not over time a disability is identified. Let's make sure that they're getting intervention as quickly as possible.
So they could be considered, they could have an IEP and be considered disability, and the longer they stay in that and not make progress would continue them, they would be out of the deficiency, they
Right.
would be in a different category.
Right, so what we would hope would happen is that through the identification of a significant reading deficiency is we're not waiting for, for testing or further, indication that a student isn't progressing, that we would say, you're below this cut point, you need intervention, let's start intervening. And then over time, if a student is not responding to very high quality classroom instruction as well as very high quality intervention, then you start to say, the student is not responding. There might be something else going on, and that's when you would dig even further. But we're not waiting for that to happen to say, let's provide some help.
But we would know that by 3rd grade, is that correct?
We would know that by the first time a student is assessed within the first 60 days of a school year. If they are below that significant reading deficiency level, when they're first assessed, they go on to a READ plan right away.
Any other questions? Just want to remind ourselves that we, in fact, strongly supported this change in the bill. This is one of the initiatives of the state board. Are we ready for a vote? Okay, let me read this again. The motion on the floor is to approve the rules for the administration of the Early Literacy Grant Program 1 CCR 301-90, made by Board Member Rankin and seconded by Board Member Flores. Ms. Cordial, would you please call the roll? Thank you for the script.
Board Member Durham.
Yes.
Board Member Flores.
Yes.
Board Member Goff.
Yes.
Board Member McClellan.
Yes.
Board Member Rankin.
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle.
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously.
So sorry, Mr. Chapman, we took your program out of order. However, we would love to have a 5-minute break.
Sure, that's fine.
Good. We're going to do that even if it's not fine. Certification and Accountability Messaging. Commissioner?
Yes, I know you guys have missed seeing Mr. Chapman. If you recall, a year ago, you got to see him every single board meeting as we were talking about the ESSA plan. So we thought he's your favorite staff member. And now we thought we would bring him back for an encore to let you know how the progress is going. So, Mr. Chapman.
Welcome back.
Thank you, Commissioner Anthus and Madam Chair. I think it was about a year ago that we came before you with a slide deck of about 94 PowerPoint slides. Toward continuous improvement, I think we only have 5 slides today. So we're here today to follow up on the email you received last month regarding schools that have been identified for support and improvement under the Every Student Succeeds Act. One of the goals in implementing ESSA, one of our goals in implementing ESSA is to weave the ESSA accountability requirements into the state's requirements as seamlessly as possible. And you may recall, as part of developing the state's ESSA plan, that ESSA requires states to annually assess the performance of all schools, considering overall performance, the performance of disaggregated groups of students, and for high schools, graduation rates. And to use that annual assessment to identify schools that are in need of support and improvement. That is, the school has overall low student outcomes, student groups that are struggling, and or a third or more of the students are not graduating. Once identified, our goal is to ensure that each district and its schools receive the services, support, and attention it needs to identify the strategies necessary to improve outcomes for students. So in looking at this chart, there's overall performance, there's the performance of historically underserved students, and then grad rates. Those are the things that we consider in identifying schools for support and improvement. Once identified, our goal is to offer our supports and funding that are available for school improvement in a manner that's integrated across the state and federal parts. So toward that end, we've created a single application for state and federal school improvement grants, as well as developed supports and services, and created a streamlined process for making those supports available as part of a single process. So I guess in the past, we had, to a certain degree, random acts of kindness. This is an attempt to bring it all together and offer it in a coherent fashion to schools and districts. The goal of all of this work in offering support and service and identifying schools for support and improvement is to lead to the development, together with the larger school community, of a strong, unified improvement plan that leads to improved outcomes for all the students enrolled in the school. So with regard to ESSA, as I noted, we're asked to consider school performance, overall school performance, and the performance of historically underserved students and grad rates. For overall performance, we identify the lowest 5% of Title I schools. It's important to note that this is what the school performance frameworks do as well. So there is alignment between what we're asked to do under ESSA and what we're asked to do under state legislation. So in considering the performance of Title I schools with regard to growth and achievement among all schools, we pull out the 5% of Title I schools with the lowest overall performance for comprehensive support and improvement. Also identified for comprehensive support and improvement is any high school or alternative education center with a graduation rate of less than 67% regardless of Title I school status. With regard to the performance of historically underserved students, any school that has groups of students that are struggling in comparison to other groups of students at the school is identified for targeted support and improvement. The focus here is more on gaps in achievement and growth as opposed to outcomes across the board for all students. Finally, Any school that has groups of historically underserved students that are performing at a level comparable to the lowest 5% of Title I schools is identified for additional targeted school improvement. So, how have we done in aligning? As you recall, as part of the state plan approval process, we went back and forth with the U.S. Department of Education regarding how we go about applying the indicators and assessing school and district performance. It's important to note that the state ratings on this chart are not yet final, pending the request for consideration process. But if you look at the overlap, we have 79 schools that are identified, both state and ESSA. We have state 159 schools identified for priority improvement and turnaround. Then we have 80 schools that have been only identified by the state. We have 267 schools identified for comprehensive and targeted improvement under ESSA, and 188 of those have only been identified under ESSA. So we have a little bit less overlap than we had last year based on the results of our ESSA state plan approval and what they permitted us to do in applying the accountability requirements. Finally, so as noted, there's an identification process, and then there's a process for providing support and service to those schools that have been identified, and an improvement planning process and planning implementation process that follows. So it's on the back end of the process after identification where I think we've really been able to do some nice things in integrating state and federal. One of the things that we've done is we've identified supports coordinators. So any district that has a school identified for improvement under state or federal has a single point of contact to whom they can go to help them assess their needs and access services and supports, both internal to CDE and external to CDE. So it really creates a process to broker and deliver services and supports based on the needs of the schools that have been identified and the reasons that they've been identified. As I noted earlier, we've created an easy application, empowering action for school improvement. It's not really so easy, but it's as easy as we can make it at this time. What it does is, as opposed to those sort of random acts of kindness that I mentioned earlier, where we would be throwing out RFPs throughout the year for different purposes and different reasons, sort of unpredictable for the schools and districts. It made it difficult for them to budget for improvement. We've created a single process and a single point in time where we make those funds available, both state and federal school improvement grant funds. We take a needs-based approach to allocating those resources, where we have some back and forth together with the districts that have those schools to identify the resources that would be most helpful to them in improving student outcomes. So toward that end, we've aligned the federal and state resources into a single process in support of the schools that we've identified. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, all of this is, the goal is to lead to a strong, unified improvement plan developed together with the school community and is implemented with fidelity over time. So we're taking advantage of the existing unified improvement planning process and not creating a new process as part of the ESSA accountability. And so that's where we're at right now. We just launched the online easy application a week ago. Well, I guess it was last Friday, and have had a couple of easy support fairs where we brought together all the schools and districts that have been identified under the state and federal systems, and enable them to interact with service providers, folks who might be able to help them address their improvement planning needs and address the needs of the students that are enrolled in their schools. That application will be closing in mid-November, and then we'll spend the months of November and December working with those schools and districts to approve their easy applications so that they can get underway in implementing their strategies with beginning of the calendar year. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them. And if you don't, that's fine as well.
You're not getting off that easy, sir. So I have a question. So these are schools that are basically on the clock.
Some of them are
Some
on
of
the
them are,
state's
some of them
accountability
aren't.
clock. Those
The
79
resources that we're offering to them won't really come into play until the end of the year.
We'll be approving the applications and we'll be releasing the funds, yes, at the beginning of the January.
Right. So the odds of there being any significant change as a result of the next round of assessments are not really very high because there hasn't been a whole lot of time.
Mm-hmm. Many, if not, well, really the majority of the schools were identified last year, so we're part of the EASY process last year, and we awarded services and supports and other resources to them as part of the EASY application process last year. So they did their planning, and we're kind of getting on cycle.
Yeah, I'm just
They
trying
did
to,
their
I'm
plan.
trying to
Yeah,
get a
so
sense
some of
for.
them have been underway with and have received state and federal resources as of last year, and this will be an additional year for them.
In order to get a sense for the effects of these efforts, it's gonna take a couple of years.
Yes.
Just partly by virtue of the fact that it takes a half a year, essentially, to get to the point where you have done the analysis, applied for the resources, and gotten the resources. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So don't be so impatient.
It's good to feel a sense of urgency.
Okay. Colleagues, Board Member McClellan.
Thank you. I am not sure if you've gone over this with me in the past before. You may have, and I apologize if you've already covered this and I have forgotten. But when we look at the historically underserved students for targeted support and improvement, based on the gap in growth or achievement regardless of the achievement level, how much of a gap are we looking for, and can the kids who are in a group that is seeing a significant gap, can they still be doing fairly well and still qualify for that intervention if it's clear that there's a gap for a specific group of kids?
And so the degree of gap, with the targeted schools, you have to have a certain number of the disaggregated groups for us to take a deeper look at your school. For the additional target, you have to have all of the disaggregated groups. With regard to this, specifically the size of the gap necessary to trigger identification, I'm gonna phone a friend. And I'm hoping, if Ashley doesn't have that, we can certainly get the degree of gap to you quickly.
Can I just ask a quick question too? If you have to have all of the disaggregated groups, is it fair to say that we tend to see this more often in the larger districts where you're able to not have that data masked? Is that true
So
or not
yes,
necessarily?
and so that does come into play in terms of rural versus urban. And the larger urban systems, we have more of the disaggregated groups present in the schools, and so those schools tend to be more urban, the additional targeted schools than the targeted.
And maybe not as detailed as we like, but identification for groups of students is based on the performance of that group. So not necessarily the gap between where they are versus other groups of students, but they have to have, it roughly correlates to the lowest 5% of performance. They have to be at that lower band of performance as a student group to be identified.
That actually does answer my question.
Board Member Sheff.
Thanks for the presentation. Can you speak to the Unified Improvement Plan? I know it's been around for 10 or more years, right? And the feedback that I often get is just that it's a very long process, and that some districts may feel they don't get enough feedback on it, or they don't, it's a very time-consuming process, and they're not sure how much value they get out of it. I mean, conceptually, the importance of, you have an issue with achievement, and you want to make change, what's the plan? That makes total sense.
Yeah.
But then the length of the document, where it goes, and who sees it, and where the feedback loops are. At least that's what I hear from superintendents. Can you speak to the streamlining of that?
Yeah, I do think that that in addition to some of the concerns that you've expressed, I do think that we hear pretty consistently that from school districts to not change, not abandon what they all have in their focus, and a process that for many of them really works. And so I think instead of, sort of abandoning ship, really trying to do what we can to streamline the Unified Improvement Planning process, both with regard to the feedback that they get as part of it and the assistance that they receive in developing it. And then finally, the sort of the ongoing support for the implementation of the plan. So yeah, I do think that there are some things that we can do, and maybe we don't need to include as many parts of it, but I do think the process of really root cause analysis and really looking at the reasons that you've been identified and trying to identify the challenges that you have in meeting expectations, both in the state system and the federal system. So to try to give you a real answer here, yes, I do think there are some things that we can do to further streamline the Unified Improvement Planning process. Remember that in and of itself is a streamlined process, as opposed to having an improvement plan for Title I, improvement plan for Title II, Title III, and then again for the state system, it's one plan. So that goes a long way towards streamlining the process. But yes, within the Unified Improvement Plan, I think there are some things that we can do to streamline it.
Okay, and then my second question is around the, if you were to survey, and maybe you do this, schools that you're working with to assist, what would the schools say, or what do they say? Because again, I get feedback from various entities, and the question is, do you survey the schools and say, are we providing the right kind of support at the right time, under the right conditions, at the right,
Yes.
how do you adjust what you're doing to ensure that what you're doing actually works and that schools receive it and can do something with it?
And Madam Chair referenced the evaluation of the services and supports as an important aspect, and how soon can we know if the services and supports we're providing are effective. In addition to that, I think we've really begun being intentional in reaching out to schools and districts about what would be helpful. What are we currently doing that isn't so helpful? What are some of the things that we could be doing that would be helpful, and how best to make those kinds of services and supports available to schools and districts. So in terms of the UIP, I know that the UIP, as part of the annual process, really does reach out to the participants to say, hey, is this process working for you? In addition to that, we, as part of the EASY application last year and again this year, we've created a menu of supports that we offer to schools and districts, and have been intentional in reaching out to school districts as to, is this the right list? We're aware that we need to provide additional services and supports, particularly in certain areas, but given what we're currently offering, is this, which of these works for you? Where are there gaps in services? And having a dialogue with schools and district about what's most helpful through convenings that where we take advantage of those, existing convenings, superintendent's council meetings, BOCES meetings, and others, but also creating time and space to have that dialogue as well.
Is the burden on the district or school to reach out to you, or you reach to them, or it's more of a consensus?
Either way, but we need to be intentional in reaching out to schools and districts, and would encourage them also to share any ideas, recommendations, comments, concerns that they have along those lines as well.
Thank
But
you.
Board Member
But we will
Sheffel-
reach out and have reached out.
Right.
as-
I was just going to add to that, Board Member Sheffel. We do, every school and district that's identified in here
You
gets
reach
a purposeful reach out from us, and outlines the easy fairs that we've provided, the application process, the menu of services. So we do intentional reach out to them.
And that's among the roles of the support coordinator too, and as they know and understand schools and districts and their needs better, and have that dialogue together with the building principal or the district superintendent, that's an opportunity to have that conversation and, what's available and what really needs to be available in terms of service and support.
Thank you.
Board Member Rankin?
Mr. Chapman, are all of these grants for these areas, you apply for them in November and then January is when you get them? Is that what we were talking about? And is that what, I call it a job fair, but you call it some other kind of fair?
It's a provider fair. We, Easy Provider Fair.
Yeah.
We had, as part of the Easy application, there are two sources of funding. There's the Title I funding that's earmarked for school improvement. And then there's the state transformation grant funding that's earmarked for state transformation of schools. And so there's a pot of state money and a pot of federal money. The federal money is around $10 million and the state money is around $1.9 million.
And you reach out to the schools or districts that are eligible for that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all aware that they can do this easy application. And is that prominently on the website if they didn't get to the fair?
Yes, and so we've sent prior to being able to launch it's an online application. Prior to being able to launch it, we reached out through phone calls and with all the schools and districts. All the districts received a letter in mid-September informing them of the identification under state and federal legislation, and as part of that communication, we noted that there's an easy application that will be launched soon, when we expected it to be launched and when it might be due, and then also identifying the support coordinator for that district, and that support coordinator reached out to each of the districts to whom they're assigned, and that's among the things that we communicated to them. If there are districts that are unaware of the availability of these resources, we want to seek them out and communicate with them.
So could you put in some bullet points what you just told me and the information you would like to get out there? I have a meeting with West Slope superintendents next week, and I'd be more than happy to reiterate and connect. And then if they have questions, who they would call. Because if there's something that goes on here that is a fair, sometimes the people out there can't get here. But if there's any way I can communicate that, so do you have people that just don't apply for these that are eligible?
We had some that didn't apply last year, and to a certain extent, I think there are various reasons for that. We had some school districts that had AECs identified for improvement because of their graduation rate. And I heard expressed to me that they didn't really feel that CDE had much to offer at that point in time in support of AECs. So, based on Dr. Scheffel's comment, that caused us to do some self-reflection, and we've added AECs to the Connect for Success support, and there's a group of folks who are working on an AEC diagnostic that will be piloted as part of this process, and so those conversations, those folks who don't apply for this support, indicates to us that maybe there's a need for greater support in that area. So I think that's one reason they might not apply. I think there's always a concern that we'll apply and we won't receive funding, because even though we're really taking a needs-based approach, there is an aspect of competitiveness to it. There's a finite amount of resources and supports available. So trying to help them find a way to pull together an application, and the supports coordinators can provide that support to them to help ensure that they apply. There may be an awareness aspect as well, and so your willingness to share information is very helpful to us, and so we can pull together something for
Thank you very much.
Board Member Scheffel?
I just had another question. As we're looking at the language of comprehensive support and improvement, targeted support and improvement, do you have any document that would link money to what that actually is? Because when you think conceptually, these are the most needy schools in the state. and there's quite a large budget attached to helping them. And then there's the Unified Improvement Plan, which tries to assess what they can do, root cause. But then it's ambiguous when we come to, so what is being done? I mean, I'm sure you have a document like that, or if I read each of these, the CDE reflection, would it be in there? Just like something that links money to interventions for effectiveness.
So you mean that some of the money that we have awarded for the various services and
Right,
supports?
so somebody writes a grant, is what are they all very unique so that it would be hard to make
I do
any
think that
generalities?
particularly with the UIP, each UIP reflects the school and the district's unique context. The things where we make that connection easy, the easy application is where we make the connection between the services and supports that are offered or delivered to the school and the amount of money that they've received to implement that particular service or support. Again, all of the service and supports, the easy process is intended to result in a strong unified improvement plan. So there's the expectation that that what's the part of the content of the unified improvement plan are the strategies that they're implementing as a result of the easy application. We do have we have taken a look at and I think you guys have received this information in the past about the turnaround network and the Connect for Success, the amount of sites that we have currently that are participating in the turnaround network or Connect for Success, and some of the outcomes that they have experienced and some of the amount of money that they receive in addition to receiving those supports. It's not a lot of funding in those cases, but it's an ongoing provision of support. Does that answer your question, or is it
Well, I
maybe?
wondered if others have this question, just in terms of sort of a return on investment model or modified one. You know, it's sometimes helpful, even if you visualize it for grantees, to say, these are the issues, these were the resources provided in time and materials and whatever, and
Here's what happened.
the outcome is,
Yes, and so that is squarely in our sights with regard to next steps, is to really build out the evaluation component of this so that we can say with confidence, you know, this seems to work given the context similar to yours, and this might not be a good approach for you to take, and just overall effectiveness of the supports that we're providing in terms of maybe a more an evaluation that's conducted externally as opposed to evaluations that we conduct in-house.
But Board Member Shuffle, just for the simplest version, I think is yes, we can get you a list of the dollar amounts that are given for each grant to each school district. I mean, that's just
And kind of
tying
the
the
menu-
dollars to
the
what they
menu
get.
of
Yeah,
from
and
the
we can do
menu.
that by the supports that they
Right,
receive.
and
So
we can do, at least tie that, so you see how much money each district is getting and what supports they're buying for that. And then the longer term question is the evaluation of those services.
right. That's helpful.
Thank you for the information. I do have one request, which is that could you provide for us a list of the schools by CD so that as we are, do we have that already? By congressional district?
yes, and we that was a huge spreadsheet that you received. We can condense it. 'Cause I noticed it's like about a mile wide yesterday when I was trying to find some information. So we can simplify it too, but you did receive it by where you can sort by congressional district. In some cases, they
I could have
straddle.
sorted, but you gave us the whole one thing.
Yeah, and so
right? Yeah.
we can
Would you-
sort it and get you.
I'd love that
back to you.
sort.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
familiar with a couple,
Yeah.
but as I'm wandering around, it's very helpful for me to know in advance before I walk in what the questions are gonna be. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you
Glad
very
to
much,
see
you
you.
guys.
Hope you come back again. Update us on information. So we're at item 6.01,
That is correct.
accountability clock monitoring. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you. I believe we are going to turn it over to Ms. Brenda Bausch and Alyssa Pearson. Probably kick it off with Brenda.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so we are here today to give a brief update on the schools that have remained on the accountability clock after receiving an initial directed action, and were, and in year 7 based on the 2017 ratings. So we'll talk through that. I'll give you some information about the schools, and we'll talk a little bit about the progress monitoring reports that you received. And as a reminder, this is at the end of our accountability clock process. So at this point, they did have that formal hearing with the state board. Again, that was in 2017. And they, at that point, you considered the state review panel recommendation, the commissioner's report, and a proposal from the district as well in determining what action was best suited for that school or district. And then beyond that, our procedures are to continue to provide support and monitoring, and then report back to the state board on those schools. So with these year 7 schools that again are based off of that 2017 rating, so in 2016 there were actually 12 schools and 5 districts that received a hearing in 2017, and the state board directed an action. In that fall, we had some schools and districts that earned an improvement in performance rating and came off of the accountability clock. But there were 9 schools and 3 districts that remained in year 7 of priority improvement and turnaround, and that's who you have the progress monitoring reports for. So our CDE staff spent the last school year, the 2017-18 school year, following the progress at those schools and districts. And so these are listed on the PowerPoint slides with their 2016 rating, the 2017 rating, and the 2018 rating. So there are some, the preliminary 2018 rating, and there are some schools and districts that earned their way off of the accountability clock in 2018, as well as 1 district, and so I will list those out as well. So our schools and districts that exited the accountability clock based on the preliminary 2018 ratings were Bessemer Elementary School in Pueblo 60, Hope Online Middle School in Douglas County, Prairie Heights Middle School in Greeley 6, and Westminster Public Schools as a district. So we congratulate those schools and districts on their progress and encourage them to keep up the good work. I know that many of them are sustaining the improvement efforts that they've put into place and are going to hopefully stay on the right track. And then the remainder of the reports that you have are regarding the schools and districts in those reports have stayed on the accountability clock based on preliminary ratings. And so those include as 2 districts, Adams County 14 School District and Aguilar RE6. And then with schools, you have Adams City High School, Aguilar Junior Senior High School, Aurora Central High School, and Aurora Public Schools, Heroes Middle School, and Risley International Academy of Innovation, both in Pueblo, and then Hope Online Learning, their elementary school. So it was the middle school that had earned its way off. I don't know if I mentioned that. So, so the progress monitoring reports that you have in your packet were based on a variety of data that we collected. I mentioned that the turnaround support managers really spent the last school year working with those schools, visiting them, and speaking with districts and school staff. In some cases, that was through a specific grant program, so some of them are a member of, for example, the Turnaround Network. In other cases, we've had our staff liaisons just set up their own progress monitoring systems and meetings with these schools and districts. We've requested interim data from these schools and districts so that we could be able to provide that back to you and see how they're doing based on their own local data. And then with this end of the year report, we're able to also include the state data too. So in the mid-year report, we came in March to give an update on the same group of schools and districts. And at that point, we only had their local interim data, mid-year data. And now we're able to also show the state data, the summative end-of-year data. And then for those schools and districts that had management partners, we did also consider the reports from those management partners as well. So we were able to include that information, which was very helpful for us to kind of supplement our analysis and provide that insight as well from the management partners. So a couple things that are to consider when reviewing this information. It is a lot of information in these documents, and one way to think about it is to look at the student data now that we have that state level data, and see if that's not working, or if it is working, if the student data is improving, then maybe the directed actions are working. If the student data is not improving, then there are a variety of situations that could be going on, and that's when you want to dig a little deeper into those implementation notes, so the reflections on how the plan is being implemented. Because it could be that the school just needs more time that they're on the right track and they're making some incremental improvements and implementing the plan as they should be, but that student data just hasn't moved enough to come off of the clock. It could be that the directed actions are not being implemented with fidelity, and that should come through too in some of those notes in the progress monitoring reports if we say that some of the actions weren't completed or there seems to be some barriers to implementation of that directed action. Or lastly, it could be that the directed actions are not enough and will not be enough to move that school or district off of the accountability clock and towards rapidly improved student outcomes. So it is a little bit of a subjective analysis for you as you dig into these documents, but we want to just kind of frame it in that way of, now that we have the state data, it's helpful to then use that as a benchmark to then see what's going on in terms of the implementation of the plan. And with the next steps we're going to continue to work with the six schools and 2 districts that have remained on the clock with their advancing to year 8. And then there are, based on the written determinations, there are some schools and districts that were asked to come back to the state board after 1 year, and those were Adams 14 District and Adams City High School, as well as Heroes and Risley from Pueblo City Schools. And if still in priority improvement or turnaround next year, based on the 2019 frameworks, then the remainder of our list, so Aurora Central High School, Aguilar as a district and a high school, and Hope Elementary School would be asked to return to the state board as well. So that's where we are with these groups of schools that were, again, in that kind of first cohort of the received a directed action in 2017 when we had the many hearings. And so we're happy to answer questions. We do have turnaround support managers here. If you had specific questions about schools and districts and the details of the progress monitoring reports, Alyssa and I can also answer more procedural questions, and happy to take those now.
You're formulating. So real quickly, just let me ask then the 2, 3, 4, either districts or schools that got off the clock. Are we out the door? Do they still have a grant from us? What is their status in that respect? Just in terms of what are we monitoring? How are we continuing to, or are we continuing to support them?
Yes,
Sometimes if you pull the resources, we jump right back on the clock.
Right. It's a very good question, and it's the final written determination is no longer in effect, so they do not have to continue with their path. However, there are, as you mentioned, there are supports that are continuing in some of these cases, and what are you meant to write down? Okay. Oh, well, got you. Yeah. So this is pulling some of the data of what different programs are in. So Prairie Heights Middle School, for example, is in our turnaround network, so they will continue to receive those supports. Bessemer Elementary School will continue to work with Andy Swanson as a turnaround support manager, they're involved with a cohort of schools that Andy works very closely with, and so they're not. I don't imagine that those efforts would lift up at Bessemer. Okay, he says yes.
Okay.
And then Westminster Public Schools will have individual schools that are still eligible for support. I was just described through the SF through the EASY grant, and so they can still have some school funding even though the district has come off of the clock. So there'll be opportunities there for us to continue. And they have a variety of schools that are involved in a variety of programs, from our early literacy programs all the way through our pathways programs.
Plus, they implemented some things that weren't at our request or at our funding that they are continuing with.
That's correct. They opened up. Yeah, that's correct. They just opened up their Marzano Academy, which came through the state board as an approval for their innovation status. And so that school is opening this fall, and it has opened.
Okay, great. Thank you. Questions, comments? This is very helpful update. It's a lot. It felt a lot like last spring when we were reading.
Mm-hmm.
Again.
There's a question.
Is that a board member Goff?
Yep.
I'm always interpreting the.
I know, I'm trying to get taller, but it's just not working.
Okay, I'll get there. Just a minute.
General question, probably. in the districts, I guess we can focus right now on the districts that are still in priority turnaround. But among them, there are schools that have been on improvement. What are we doing with those schools? Is there some entry point that they have to get in on grant activities? I know the answer to that. You know, what kinds of entry points are there for those schools specifically to take advantage of money, support, whether it's even just internally to the district, what kinds of networking is going on? Because I think down the road, not too far, we're going to have to start looking at what's going on in those schools that aren't going anywhere. They're really not, they're not jumping up enough to get there, and they're not dropping. I think there's general curiosity. If I'm the only one, that's the way it is. But general curiosity about what is happening in those schools and where can we help people kind of get off the tendency to think we just do the two ends of life. We don't really take care of the whole spectrum of students.
And that's a great question. I think those schools in improvement are hard ones, right? Because we haven't had the resources and really dug into them quite as much. Starting next year with 1355, those schools will still, if they had been priority improvement, like the ones that have come off, they're eligible for the state funding moving forward if they're on that
For
1 year.
For 1 year.
Yeah, for that 1 year. I think one thing that we've talked to districts a lot about, and what actually when Dr. Scheffel asked her question earlier about what have we heard about needs for support, Melissa Colesman and I held a session with districts this summer up at Case, and I said, you know, what's working for you? What do you need? And one of the big things we heard was districts wanted help with their district systems for supporting their schools. They said, how do we as a district organize, and what do we prioritize, and how do we work on our role in supporting our schools? So that's something the Turnaround Network has really thought about and has built into their model, but wants to expand more out. So we're thinking about that, but it's through that district level support for their schools that I think we can probably best get at the schools on improvement. But I think there's a lot to learn there, because I think you're right, those schools kind of get lost in the middle.
Okay. Thanks. I hope it gets developed and kind of visible as
Yeah.
soon as we can do that. I think that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Board Member Scheffel.
When you look at the overlap between the schools identified for support under ESSA and these based on the state system, I think the other slide said 79 overlap, right?
Yeah.
So how does that support articulate together? Is it the same kind of support? And is it aligned pretty well? And how does the money work then? Is it, if you're in both categories, do you get an additional something? Or is it different for every school or district?
So we've really tried to make it a seamless process for schools and districts and putting it together. This year's a little bit easier. After 1355 passed, we have more flexibility with the state funds. But prior to that, last year, if schools were only identified under the state law, they could only access, it was School Turnaround Leadership Development Grant. So the only support that they were really eligible for was that grant. Now, the way the law changed, we're able to offer Turnaround Network or Connect for Success or leadership development or district designed through the way the law is. We don't have enough money to give the ones that are in that middle section, the Venn diagram, double the amount or anything. What we've really tried to do, because of the way the distribution works, because we have $10 million for federal and only 1.9 for the state, is if they're eligible for federal, prioritizing the federal distribution, because we've been limited in the state amount. But we'll look at that when we get through the data, the money this year, because what we want to do is make sure we can maximize the number of schools and districts getting the support that they need. But thank you. I'm getting my coaches back here helping. I think the reminder is that it's always needs-based. So we're really building off what is the need at that school or district. Since there's a variety of needs, before we were worried that only state money was around leadership development, which we know is a huge component of school turnaround, but we know it's not the only thing. So if a school had a really strong leader and the leader had been through a lot of that training, but now needed to do work with the staff, now there's money if that's where they're at with their needs to be able to to be able to do that work. Okay.
Mr. Durham? Sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Madam Chair. Another question, really an observation. If you just take this data at face value, which you have 2 of 179 districts that are still on the clock, and that doesn't include the ones we're monitoring for the second year, I think, but so it's slightly larger, but it's 1.1% of all the districts, and if you take 6 schools out of approximately 1,800 schools, that's 0.3%. If you just take that, you would presume that education in Colorado is just in wonderful shape, because there are so few that are getting what I would characterize as appropriate attention. And I think it really sets the stage for this board to take a very hard look at the bottom 1.1 and the bottom 0.3% as we move forward, because because we know that if 6 out of 10 Colorado students are not proficient, and yet we're dealing with 1% of the districts and 1/3% of the schools that we are considering some significant action with, I think it shows the overall accountability problem that we face. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I just
What's
add
the resource problem? But go ahead.
I think that's absolutely true. These are the schools that have remained on that level for those years. We have additional schools and districts that are on priority improvement and turnaround, just haven't been consistently on that long. But it's still a similar, if you look at those numbers, it's still a similar observation.
Yeah, the whole section that Board Member Goff was just talking about, the improvement group. I mean, we tend to work on the extremes, but we worry about all of it and don't really know that we have either the authority to do much based on the expectation really goes back to the school boards instead of our board, nor do we have the resources if they actually came to us and asked for more help. So it's a real dilemma. Board Member Flores.
But, you know, given, I'm sorry, but given the report just before, if and when we do give the resources, things do get better. So could we say that we have a big problem of resources?
Well, better is probably not good enough. Better is better.
Better is better, but we need,
it's
but
not
we
what we
do
want
need
for all kids.
resources. I mean, I think we need resources, and we hear this from, you know, we hear it from the rurals, we hear it from, I think some.
And I didn't say money. I said resources. That's not necessarily one and the same.
I would argue that with you
No, it's not.
at a later time, but I would say that monies do buy resources, and that could mean teachers, that could mean tools, that could mean curricula, it could mean textbooks, it could mean tutoring services, it could mean all kinds of things, but resources, I just tend to, what can you know, money buys resources. And
We have a lot of authority over.
I just put an equal.
I wouldn't put equal. We have authority over teacher prep. So it may be that there are some things that we should expect of our graduates. We have authority over relicensing. There are other areas that are not necessarily money specific where we might in fact be able to push the envelope a little bit. That's a discussion we can have sometime.
I just remember going into empty classrooms when I was teaching. They were literally empty. And I had to provide the resources in a week or so. I had to provide them because the principal wasn't giving me a check saying, here, go buy some resources for your book. I mean, for your classroom. So I think that's a reality for a lot of teachers out there in a lot of schools.
True. Board Member Sheffel?
I was just gonna revisit something with Mr. Chapman, I don't know if it's possible, but in terms of the funds, there are formula funds and competitive funds. and funds based on need. When you think of your budget, how much did you say it was? Formula funds that go to ESSA schools?
It's, not all of the schools that. As part of ESSA, we do allocate title funding on a formula basis to.
How much is that?
So there's around 150 million in Title I, 10 million of which is made available as school improvement grants, around 23 million in Title II funding, and around 8 million in Title III funding, and around, I can't remember where we landed on that, but between around 6 million in Title IV funding. So those are allocated to school districts on a formula basis. In addition to that, if they are have schools identified for improvement, then they can access the 10 million in school improvement funding.
So it's about a total of 300 million?
No, it's more around 200 million. So 150, 173, 181, around 200 million.
That's a lot of money. It sounds like a lot of money, but yet.
It is a lot of money.
Spread across how many schools, or you don't know exactly?
We have around, I think we almost all school districts access formula funding. I think we have around 650 Title I schools, and then the other funds are spent more at the district level on behalf of district schools.
Okay, thank you.
Yes?
Madam Chair, one closing kind of question to, well, in comment, we appreciate the discussion around being aware of the improvement rating bands, and that's part of the reason why on the progress monitoring reports too, we wanted to make sure to include the sub-indicator data, because in most of these cases, they're still at a does not meet in terms of achievement. Prairie Heights being the exception, that they moved up into the performance overall category and are actually approaching at academic achievement, but most of the other schools are still at that does not meet. And so we've continued to have those conversations with them as well, and they're aware of that too, and just encouraging them to continue their improvement efforts and sustain that. Getting growth is great, but also continuing to push on the achievement and the status level. And also, lastly, just wanted to get your feedback in terms of if these reports are helpful in terms of the information that they contain. And as we enter into another year of progress monitoring in that cycle, if there are any other additional elements you would like included, to please let us know and we can make sure to include those.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciated all the information, despite the fact that it seemed a smidge overwhelming for one meeting. As I said, it felt a little bit like we were preparing for those hearings again, because there was so much of the detail. But that's just the nature of this thing, and I find all of it helpful. Different approaches to the same status, different ways of looking at the same state. Board Member McLeod.
This might be slightly more commentary, because we may all be limited in the degree to which we can delve into this particular area, because these at some point become quasi-judicial in nature when they start queuing up to come before us again.
Yep.
But one of the elements that I wish I could get more of a read on, and that you may not be able to share with us, is the level of, or the effectiveness of community engagement and buy-in. And I know that's kind of a mushier thing to measure, and it also gets messy when we try to dovetail that with the considerations of the quasi-judicial nature of the matter at hand. But so that's more of a commentary, but if it helps to know that that's part of what's weighing on our mind, at least on my mind. When I see that these aren't coming into the categories that we hope they're rising to, when they're coming back before us and we would like to have seen them do better, that's one of the first things I'm wondering is how did we do in that area? And I don't know if there's a way for you to give us an early warning on that, because it is so subjective. So I guess that's a little more commentary, and it may be one of those things that we see for those of us who see that happening within our own district. Before it becomes a quasi-judicial matter, we can get a read on it by staying in close contact with our superintendents and with the stakeholders in our own communities. But then once it comes before this board, I know I'm always trying to get a feel for whether or not I'm getting an accurate read on public buy-in or community buy-in that is such an essential component. Maybe it's something we can be asking our management partners to weigh in on. That might be the avenue. for us to get, if there is a way to get an early warning if that is going badly, maybe the management partners can be the ones to help us. But even as I say that, for some of these plans, in the event that the district has some oversight in terms of the selection or hiring, that's a little dicey for a partner to say, hey, they're getting this major area wrong, if essentially at the end of the day, that's kind of their boss. So it's a tough one. So I don't know that I'm asking for an answer, because I don't know that there is one right now, but that's part of what's weighing on my mind as we go into this second look for some of these schools.
That's really helpful, and I think some things that we can think about. I think we could even think about, as part of the written determination at the end of that first hearing, putting some expectations out in there, some ways to gather information. So we'll work and see what we can think about for those. But that's helpful to hear from you all, so thank you.
Board Member Goff?
Yeah, very quickly, thank you for the, I was so comfortable and impressed and grateful for the format of your final, each district or school. I appreciate, what I have started doing sometimes is I go to the end first. Keep the end in mind, whatever our phrase is about that. But I read the end of year summary reflection, then I went to the mid-year, and then I looked at the data. And it was just an exercise that I did. I thought I loved the way it was worded. It was reader-friendly. I don't know that anyone besides us could not understand and pick up what the main thoughts about that were. Appreciate it. But that was very helpful. I do think we got a nice feel for the whole picture without jeopardizing the integrity of the conversations we're about to start. And just appreciate it. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And the ESSA portion of the work as well. I thought that, I think both of our summaries and wrap-ups on that were great.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks for the update. Thanks for all the hard work. We seem to be off schedule, a smidge. Next item on our agenda is consideration of the State Board's administrative procedures for accountability actions. Commissioner?
We try to make it efficient here, so we didn't have to have
Nobody
any
had
staff
to move.
changeover, so we'll turn it back over to Dr. Bausch.
Thank you. So we're back with this item, agenda item. We presented this in September as an information item, and we are here today asking for a vote on the revised procedures. One thing to note that came up during our discussion at the September board meeting, we talked about having the ability for the state board to essentially lay over a decision to the next day within the same board meeting. And just wanted to update you that we feel that that flexibility, the language is very broad. in the procedure, so you do have that flexibility. And in practice, Mrs. Cordial and I are working to schedule those hearings on Wednesday of the board meeting, so that you could, if you chose to, lay over that decision for the Thursday.
Okay.
And then, lastly, we wanted to just note that these are moving forward, so the November hearings, which would be the next board meeting, would be based, if you voted to adopt these procedures today, would be based on these procedures. So we would be moving forward with immediately noticing, for example, the public comment, written comment, that we have in the procedures would open up 30 days in advance of the board meeting and close 10 days in advance. So we would notify that. We would actually notice that very shortly after this board meeting.
That's if you can get us to all vote for this.
I'm sorry?
That's if you can get us to all vote.
That's correct. That's
let's see, do I want a motion before we have a discussion, please?
You want me to do it?
Sure.
I move to approve the proposed revisions to the administrative procedures for state board accountability actions.
Proper motion, do I have a second? Thank you. So I still have a comment on it, which I thought I made the last time also, the 10-day thing. This effectively prevents community comment on a proposal by the district, should the district submit theirs 10 days before, and the cutoff for public participation is 10 days before. Did you all have a discussion about that? And did you worry?
I think, and I'm sorry if I misheard at the last meeting, but what I understood from you all was we see this as a potential issue. With the timelines for this November, we felt like we needed to, we felt like we needed to move forward with it as it is to give the district enough time to bring things forward, and that we had public comment, and that we would see if it became an issue. But I absolutely could have misinterpreted that, so I'm sorry if I did. Yes, I did.
Well, I mean, I'm worried about, pretty clearly, we have
Yeah.
some strong feelings in what we heard yesterday. And if in fact the community does not really know what's being brought forward and can then not participate or cannot comment, I suspect they're gonna wanna comment at the time of the hearing, which doesn't give me great comfort either, because we really don't feel that that's appropriate.
Hold on. I'm going to what we said.
Board Member Durham, can you help me with
I
this?
think, well, I don't think there is a great solution to the problem, unfortunately, but we could, I mean, right up until the day of the hearing, the written comments can be received by Ms. Cordial and distributed to all the board. But that may not, I'm sure in the minds of many of those who may wish to comment, that is likely not to seem adequate, but we are in a little bit of a bind as to how to essentially
But
close
this
the record.
says we won't accept we won't recognize anything after 10 days prior. Did I misread that?
No, you're
No,
correct.
but-
You're correct. I think Board Member Durham suggested we could edit that to say
Yeah.
we can accept written comments up until the board meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that would certainly solve the,
Okay.
Yeah, and that's as good as it'll
or
probably
maybe
get.
even a few
5
days
days.
before, 5 days. Just an opportunity for interested parties to look at what the proposal is from the district and comment. And I agree, in writing is the very best way.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what we want anyway, isn't it? Isn't that what we?
Yeah, there's just not a good solution, because if they're verbal to any one individual board meeting member, then it will constitute ex parte communication.
No, it
Would-
says comments must be submitted in writing to the State Board of Education through email or mail. So even within
Right.
the 30 days, we're requesting that. What this does is give them a couple more days in order to respond to what the recommendation is from the district.
Correct.
Are you all comfortable with that?
I am.
Yes.
notion?
I am.
Yeah,
Well,
It's better than nothing.
Yeah, and it's
It's
all
not,
written.
it's not great, but it's better.
Board Member Goff?
So the district's plans will be coming to us 10 days before. So if
Or
we-
more, but no less
Well,
than 10
yeah.
days.
It sounds fine to me. I don't know about the day of the hearing. I don't know about that.
Yeah,
but-
we probably should
but I
say
do think
within 5 days or something like that,
5 days
because
is reasonable.
Ms. Cordial's got to be able to cope with.
You might want to
Getting
make
the
it
stuff to us.
clear, any
Right.
messaging on that, whether it's 5 days or 5 business days, 5 calendar days.
Yes.
Up
so
to
one-
5 days after
up to 5 days.
submission of the plan from the
And to be
district.
clear, so this is just to get it in your board packet, your regular deadline. So it's not, the 10 days is actually just when, so it's usually the Wednesday before a board meeting, you pick up your packet. Materials are due, and our internal deadline is around that Monday so about 10 days before. So you would not necessarily get it on that 10 days before, you'd get it when you get your board packet with the rest of your materials. And
But
so
we would
then
have the
that's when
ri-
it would go public. So then they would have, if you wanted to extend public written comment, you could say to the Monday prior to the board meeting, and it would be about 2 business days.
Yes.
Would
Ms. Cordial,
give them the weekend.
3 business days.
So,
can
3
you
business days.
deal with that?
sure. As long as you guys are fine with, having an electronic version and receiving the hard copy the day of the meeting.
Oh,
that
yeah.
may
Oh, yeah,
happen.
yeah. That's our job to figure out how to do it electronically.
Okay. That's fine. So,
it's just, I think, section C2.
Yep.
Is your hand up? No, it's not up. It's not.
No.
Okay. Anyone else's hand up?
So are you adding that to the motion, or do we want a
Yeah.
revision of the motion?
yeah.
Have to amend the motion.
Okay.
Amend the motion.
All right, we get to test our
Yeah.
System.
Here we go. All right. So,
No, we need to figure out the amendment.
for the Wednesday board meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure I understood that.
Just change the 10 to the 2 calendar
Yep.
days prior to the hearing.
Yeah. Okay, so, let's see.
I hope I never have to just tell this, where everybody can see you type and tell people to. Oof.
10 words a minute. My speed. And that's with doing it like this.
Do you know?
That's the very last section.
My computer's very muddy.
Conduct of
Okay.
hearing.
All right.
Yep.
Item.
So which of you would like to make that amendment?
It's not conduct, it's pre-hearing briefing and submission
written
of
up there
record.
now.
Mhm.
It's up there.
Should I amend my motion?
Is that,
Don't we have to
Let's
vote on the
see.
amendment and then?
Oh.
Yeah. I think we
yeah,
need
we
to vote
need
on the
a
amendment.
motion, yeah, for this amendment. Okay.
Board Member McClellan, go ahead.
I move to amend the motion so that the pre-hearing briefing and submission of the record, Section A, change deadline for all comments from 10 calendar days to 2 calendar days prior to the board meeting.
Mhm.
Thank you. Do I have a second to that amendment?
I second that.
Thank you.
Okay.
You ready to call the roll, please?
Sorry?
I'm sorry. Last I heard was 10 days, now we're at 2? When did that
Changing it from 10 days to 2 calendar days. So originally, it would have been due the Monday before the agenda goes live on Wednesday. Now we're just moving that to the following Monday, so it would be due the Monday before the Wednesday board meeting.
So that the public can respond to whatever is submitted by the district.
I understand.
Okay.
I'm just curious as to where we got from a 10-day thing to a 2-day thing.
Well,
We haven't
It's
yet,
the
we have to
last.
pass the amendment to
We
get
haven't
there.
had-
I don't even, where did that
Do you have a recommendation for something different, Board Member Goff?
No, I do not.
Okay, Board Member
Asking
McClellan.
you a question.
I just wanted to offer, if I'm understanding correctly, and someone please check me if I am not understanding correctly, if we are requiring that the districts submit their plans a full 10 days prior to the board meeting at which their hearing will take place, or the look back, whatever we're calling it, then we want to give the public a chance to respond to the plan. And since that plan goes public 10 days out, we want to give them ample time to get their responses in. And out of consideration for Ms. Cordial's workload and the rush that I'm sure it is in advance of every board meeting,
Well, and for us too, to get
and
it
for us
read.
too, yes, we will get hard copies that if they're, of those comments, if they're turned in soon enough, prior to the time that Wednesday when we normally get our packets. But those late breaking comments that we may get, up until the Monday
there's only two.
before the board meeting, we may receive electronically.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Are we ready to call the vote on the amendment?
Ready?
Go,
Okay.
please.
Board Member Durham?
Yes.
Board Member Flores?
Yes.
Board Member Goff?
Yes.
Board Member McClellan?
Yes.
Board Member Rankin?
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle?
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder?
Yes.
Thank you. That amendment passes unanimously.
And we're being
So
positive.
now going back to the motion made by Board Member Rankin, should it now read, I move to approve the
There it is.
As amended.
As amended.
as amended?
I move
Could you squiggle that in there, please?
approve as amended.
Amendment.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't, right, no, you're, just as amended.
I move to approve the, as amended, the proposed revisions to the administrative procedures for the State Board Accountability Actions.
Thank you. That's a proper motion. Second. Thank you. Vote.
Well,
Is there,
Deb seconded it.
Yeah.
so
Do you want
let's
Deborah.
Leave her there.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further discussion, folks? Go, please.
Board Member Durham.
Yes.
Board Member Flores.
Yes.
Board Member Goff.
Yes.
Board Member McClellan.
Yes.
Board Member Rankin.
Yes.
Board Member Shuffle.
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously.
Oh, we're only 15 minutes behind. Not bad. Not bad. Next item, yes, we are. Next item is lunch recess.
Yay.
Would it be acceptable to everybody that we come back for information item number 9 at 1 instead of at 12:45? That way you'll get your whole hour
Thank you.
for lunch. Super. So we will be back at 1.
Thank you.
Man, that is so nice. I'm not gonna eat it now, though.